This podcast is brought to you by JAM, Junction Arts and Media, building community in the Upper Valley through media.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Going with Dismas. I'm your host, Jeff Backus, and today I have with me the president of Dismas of Vermont, Drew Rockwell, and he's a very special guest, so special that he's here by himself. He's worthy in himself.
I don't know about that.
Drew, you just want to kind of give us your background, actually, your professional background, and the story that guided you to Dismas of Vermont.
Yeah, I've spent almost all my life kind of building products and companies and dialed back the amount of time I spend working and, commercially working and looking to find new ways to kind of give back to the community. What guided me to Dismas was really three things, interestingly. One was just happenstance. I have a friend who had a party, and when I first met you at her house in support of Rita McCaffrey, the founder of Dismas, a guy, Tommy, spoke there, and the story was just so moving, and Rita and her late husband were just so inspirational that my wife and I drove home and said, we should cook there. We should get involved with that organization. So one of it was just, a friend invited me to a party, and I showed up, and I got moved by his story. The second thing, is I've always been interested and, frankly, a little bit horrified by our criminal justice system in the United States. And it's so hard to find a way to touch that system because it's just so massive. And I was just intrigued with the opportunity. I've always wanted to work in that area and intrigued with the opportunity to catch people as they're coming out of incarceration and, perhaps wrap some support around them in their transition as they kind of rebuild their lives. So, a second one is just sort of a personal interest. And then the third one is super personal. My late sister, who died really tragically in a hiking accident and when she was 23 or 24 years old, was super motivated and around second chance and helping people from all walks of life who've had a tough issue in their lives get back on their feet and give them another opportunity to do something. And she's still, 40 years later, enormously present in my life. And so this happy confluence of being at the right place at the right time, having a family member for whom this issue was so resonant with them, and also caring a lot about the issue of criminal justice.
Yeah, and I think, the more we're able to get the Dismas story and the Dismas mission out into the community, the more we'd be able to resonate with, the community members. Do you remember what about Tommy's story really stuck with you and inspired you to pursue this a little bit further? Yeah,
I mean, for me, when and this happens, when I'm cooking dinner and sharing a meal with the residents, when I'm hearing them speak, when we're sitting around the driveway, shooting a hoop after a game, after dinner or something like that. When you come to sort of understand the challenges that these individuals have faced in their lives, they're just breathtaking. I just remember thinking to myself, wow, if I was dealt the same hand of cards that Tommy was dealt or any of the residents were dealt, I'm not sure I would have played them any differently, could have played them any differently. And we're all human beings, and we, I'm so fortunate, and I got dealt a fortunate hand, and not everybody has that opportunity. And so for me, I get, I just feel like it's a responsibility, that to, support people who just haven't been as lucky as. So yeah, it's a very connective thing when you hear somebody's story and you say to yourself, wow, there's a lot that person had to overcome, and the courage that they're trying to kind of rebuild their lives and find a way through life. The courage is just, frankly, breathtaking.
Now, you mentioned, the criminal justice system, it's inherently difficult, it's broken. It came up in a previous podcast, the idea of a Dismas intervention, building living at a Dismas house into the sentencing, and bypassing going to jail. So someone has a relatively minor offense, and maybe we can right the ship a little bit better, more effectively, if someone were to say, live at Hartford Dismas House for 3 to 6 months, and then we can reevaluate, somewhere between probation and jail. Try that. What would you say to something to that effect?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a really interesting idea. I mean, I think programs that intercept people who might traditionally go to jail and to find other solutions or other opportunities short of going, being incarcerated, they make a ton of sense to me. I don't know. I haven't really thought deeply enough about whether Dismas has a role to play in that, whether we could build a house, whether we could create, kind of a mixture of housing, how that would work with the DOC. I haven't thought deeply enough about it, but notionally, the idea of creating these opportunities short of incarceration to help people kind of get back on their feet and rebuild their lives and potentially, repair the damage that they've done to the community in a non-traditional, what we would say is a non-traditional way. They make a ton of sense to me. I'm intrigued by the idea. I mean, I think there's so much to do in this space. And, the question really is, given Dismas's distinctive competency and capabilities, what is the strategic direction of travel that we should be headed in over the next few years?
And that's the concept of restorative justice. It's, the judge and jury were not directly affected by the criminal offense. So what input does the victim say or have in the process? How do we correct that? How do we heal the harm done? I mean, that's the concept of restorative justice.
For sure.
In doing so, in hypothetically bypassing jail, we can directly start going to work on healing the harm done. Is the offender, do you think, better affected, better helped?
Yeah, I think so. It depends, obviously. Notionally, yes. I think both the offender and the person who was offended have an opportunity to kind of, one of the things that's cool about Dismas is this sort of notion of reconciliation, of kind of, reconciling the former prisoner back into the community, but also, really importantly, reconciling the community back, with the formerly incarcerated individual. And so this notion of connecting community with offense, taking the middleman out of that sometimes is, I think, a really interesting notion.
So, Mr. President, you're in charge of Dismas of Vermont, the parent organization of all the Dismas houses. What is the role? We never really talked about this on this podcast. What is the role of Dismas of Vermont as opposed to the local houses?
Well, I mean, it's really a symbiotic role where I think the state organization, provides, has overall financial accountability overall in terms of the overall finances of the organization. It has policy accountability in terms of trying to create sort of a standard set of policies. It manages the relationship, overall relationship with the Department of Corrections. So it has kind of, and it strategically, it sets the direction of the organization. Like when we opened a woman's house in Rutland, for example, recently, that initiative comes out of kind of the Dismas of Vermont, in partnership with the local communities. But the local councils and the local houses are hugely important to that model because, remember, the mission of Dismas is this community reconciliation element. And so having, building kind of a local council in the communities in and around where our houses are is just hugely important, not only for fundraising, but for connecting the community back to the residents in that house. So it's one of these kind of centralization, decentralization, where the statewide organization provides, some support and structure and policy and financial accountability, those kind of things. And the local houses really are the place that cements the connection between the community and the local residents.
So what would you say to a community member who, has heard of Dismas, has seen us at farmers markets and seen us here and there? They kind of know who we are, what we do. They're not directly involved. What message would you give to these folks that would potentially inspire them to take the next step as you did?
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question. When I think of Dismas, I think it's sort of a two-way. For me, it's been a two-way street where I've easily gotten as much out of my involvement, whether it's cooking and sharing a meal with the residents, whether it's, being on the outreach committee of a local council, whether it's being, the treasurer or the president of the statewide board. I've easily got as much out of my engagement with the residents as hopefully I've given them. So it's really it's very much a two-way street, and I would say to somebody, if you want to find this organization where you can get your hands dirty, where you can connect with individuals, where you can share a meal, with people who are not maybe the people you're seeing every day at your local, supermarket or at the kids' soccer game or at the, it's just such an enriching opportunity. At least I found it, where you get a lot of personal growth. So it's one of those beautiful organizations where you kind of get a lot in return for getting involved.
And I think it also, happens that, our residents are the people you see at the store, at soccer games, but you don't know any differently, so you don't think any differently. But when you attach them to the idea of, oh my God, they're a criminal offender, it completely skews your view of who these people are. And I mean,
yeah, these are just human beings like we all are. And these are people, who, may have made a mistake in a certain point in their life, or maybe a couple of mistakes like we all make. Maybe the severity of their mistake is different than the severity of the mistakes that I've made, but it doesn't. We're all human beings. When you connect with another human being who maybe you don't have the opportunity to connect with through the normal course of your lives, and you really understand the challenges that he or she has faced, I don't know, for me, it kind of broadens this sense of humanity that we're all connected.
And you kind of touched on it with the Tommy story. You say, the hand he was dealt kind of put him in a very poor position. And that's kind of a recurring theme that comes up through the story sharing at the dinner table on this podcast. Do you agree that this, in large part, contributes to the behavior later in life, childhood traumas?
Totally. Yeah. The trauma that individuals face early in life, lack of a family or a stable family that, where they could grow up, the circumstances that they have been presented with, it's just very difficult for, a young kid or somebody to navigate that. It's just really impossible. I can't even imagine it. So yeah, I really feel like when you understand those stories and you sort of reflect on, well, how would I have handled that? Again, it's part of this reconciliation process and this connection process. It's like we're all human beings.
And I think, through my experience as house director, Dismas also offers a lot of teaching moments. Many of our residents, I guess almost all of them, never had formal sit-down dinners, like you and I likely had. You don't know proper etiquette, proper dinner conversation, and it's a teaching moment. I mean, I remember one time we were on our Dismas camping trip and we stopped at a restaurant for lunch, and one of my residents who had been incarcerated virtually from the age of 16 had no idea what an appetizer was. Now, how do I explain what an appetizer is? Yeah. It's food to make you more hungry.
Exactly.
And they don't serve those in jail. So and it kind of gives me a reference point of where this individual's coming from.
Yeah. I was cooking burgers one night at the house, and this guy, Dave, he had just come out of jail that day. He was standing around the grill with me while I was cooking, and I put some cheese on the burger and I melted it, and then I took it off, and he looked at me and goes, "That's the first time I've seen melted cheese in 10 years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, but it's just like, it just brought it, alive for me, the environment that he's coming out of. If somebody ever gave him a cheeseburger, they were just slapping a piece of cheese on top of a cold piece of meat. And he just looked at me, and his eyes were, he was just like, that's the first time I've seen melted cheese in 10 years. I was like,
something I've seen a few times now is the appreciation for the residents when they come out of jail for brewed coffee. They're so used to the instant mixed coffee.
Yeah.
It's the simple things we just take for granted. Every morning I go and turn on my Mr. Coffee and just go on with my day.
But, and you think about people who are in that environment and then get released, and just the contrast. Sometimes the residents that, I meet who are new to the house, who've been there a day, a week, the first few weeks, it just feels like this massive contrast from where they were to where they've been plopped down into a place, like the sense of community, I think, at the Hartford House or in all our houses is just really special. People are coming in, they're asking about you, they're telling stories about their lives or your lives. You're just kind of sharing stories as human beings. And, you think about what they've been dealing with, for the time they've been incarcerated or even the time before they've been incarcerated. And now they're propped into this kind of environment. And, sometimes I think they kind of roll their eyes like, what just happened?
Exactly. Do you remember the Hartford Christmas party last year, the potluck? One of the residents that we had in this podcast previously, Lucas, was released that morning and then dropped into a 30-person Christmas party.
Yeah.
And he was just in a state of shock.
Yeah.
And, to you and I, we think, oh, this is nice. Everybody get together. We'll have some music and food and fun.
Exactly.
And he was just completely in shock. Probably I didn't use my best judgment. A few weeks ago, I had a podcast where I had Tim, an individual who was released that morning. I said, hey, you want to go on a podcast this afternoon? He said, okay. And it didn't go smoothly because he just wasn't mentally prepared to start talking. And
sure,
I mean, he was in a very restrictive environment. He comes out and I can say whatever I want. I can.
Yeah. And people are going to listen to this.
Yeah. People care. I mean, that's a foreign concept too, that the greater community actually cares about you.
Yeah.
That being said, Tim will be coming back in a future podcast. He said he wants to try it again. He said, okay, I'm ready now.
I love it. Well, this is a process, right? I mean, you know it so much better than I do because, formerly being a house director and just your own journey in this, this is a process. It's not like flipping a switch. It doesn't get better overnight. There's, failure is part of this process or, and it's just it's a process. And if you look at it that way and you stay with it and you have faith, you can really, help change the trajectory of people's lives. And, back to your question about why do you get involved, if it's one-on-one work, obviously, but if you can make a difference in one person's lives or two persons' lives or in some small way, a meaningful difference that changes the arc of that life, what a great thing to do and what a rewarding thing to do.
Yeah. And every individual is obviously different, and to be able to identify what I can do to, give a little assist on the transitional process varies from person to person.
Totally.
I've had people get out of jail and say, I can't sleep because it's too quiet. They're used to the noise.
Yeah.
I had one resident, he was about 6'3", 350 pounds. I had to buy him a nightlight because he wasn't used to sleeping without security lights. And it's just these little things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is something I realized fairly recently, that the fluorescent lighting in the house was a poor choice to be installed in the house because the quick flicker of the light is, reminiscent of a
institutional
jail. Right.
Yeah.
So there's so much, there's a deep psychology to this.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's interesting. And, I think I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, but I think there's, it's a great model. There's things that, are changing in our model, and there are things that are changing in the community that, that require us to continue to evolve and grow and continue to offer, new services and new ways to support our residents. But the central idea of the model, this reconciliation between an individual and the community, the central idea about the community coming in and cooking and sharing a meal with the residents and building community with those residents over time. I mean, I think that idea is just a very powerful idea.
We recently opened the Women's House in Rutland. In your mind, are there other populations that be entertained that could benefit from a Dismas model?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think the trajectory of growth for Dismas kind of comes in really three flavors. The first is, I think, continuing to find the appropriate ways to support our existing residents, the population, the challenges that the population face that we're housing now, as opposed to maybe the challenges they faced 20 years ago, are significantly different. The addiction issues, for example, are very, very different. And, the mental health challenges are very, very, powerful. So the question is, we're not a service provider, we're a housing provider and a community reconciliation provider, but the things we do to quarterback and create supports, wrap support around our residents and make it easy for our residents to get the support they need, I think is important. Because obviously for us, success is our residents moving on, living independently, having a successful transition, and being reintegrated into the community, having a job, having their own housing, changing that, that arc of their life. So one travel I think is certainly that. The second one is the one you mentioned, which is, are there either other communities or other populations where in Vermont, where a Dismas house might make sense? So our houses right now are Rutland, Burlington, and Hartford, and we have 5 houses, So are there other communities where, potential of a Dismas house might make sense? Or, we have a women's house in Rutland, would a women's house in the Upper Valley or somewhere like that be an interesting model to pursue? And the third one, which is, I think, very present today, given all of the housing issues in Vermont, just affordable housing the challenges of affordable housing are so acute. Should Dismas as an organization kind of move beyond its congregate model to also assist, potential residents as they transition out of congregate living into, more independent living through either, owning or leasing our own apartments, or, various strategies to kind of 3-quarter housing, as Rita likes to talk about it, a way to kind of support the residents' next step in their transition. And I think those are sort of the three things we're noodling on and thinking about how to go forward with. And I think each of them are important and powerful. And, all I can say is, if you think about housing challenges generally that Vermonters are facing right now, and people in the Upper Valley, and then you think about this particular population that we're serving, formerly incarcerated individuals, the challenges of housing that cohort of people are enormous that society puts in front of them permanently.
Right, and you described that, needs are changing, the population's changing. There's not the same demographics, needs as they were 30 years ago. Dismas has historically made the distinction of, we do not provide services within the house. This is where you live. This is where you can relax. Now, do you foresee that continuing, or are needs becoming so great that at some point we're going to have to do some in-house services? Because the people who work at Dismas in the house are just, regular people trying to do wonderful things.
Yeah, they're not professional social service workers or something like that. And I don't foresee Dismas becoming a social services agency, like actually itself providing those services. I just don't think that's our distinctive competency. And I think, there are other organizations that for whom that is their distinctive competency. But your question is, kind of nuanced. Like, as you know, in the women's house in Rutland, we do lease some space to Turning Point, and they provide, some office hours and support, coaching support for the women, some of the women in our existing houses.
Can I pause you right there for 2 seconds? We talked about Turning Point a lot with the Rutland podcast, and we never took the time to describe who Turning Point is.
Yeah.
Do you have a
I don't know. Do you have a good headline? It's basically a support organization that helps people, with addiction issues and kind of life support and coaching issues.
Yeah, recovery support, AA, NA meetings.
Right, yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just basically. But what's different about the Women's House in Rutland is they're physically co-located, or they have an office. I mean, they're a statewide organization. They have an office physically in the house. And there are certain hours in that they devote to the residents in that house, office hours in that house. And I was talking to some of the women. We had our board meeting in Rutland 10 days ago or something like that, in the women's house in Rutland. And we did a tour, and I was talking to some of the women who were living there, and they were super enthusiastic about their coach, their Turning Point coach, and they were really on the ground floor of the house, and it was just so easy. So it just made me think, like, is that something that we should be thinking about more broadly? I mean, one of the great things about Dismas, I think, is because we have 5 houses and we could test it in a house, and we could see how it works in Rutland in the women's house, and then we could ask ourselves, wow, is this something we should do more broadly? So I don't know. I mean, I really don't foresee us becoming a social service provider. I think that would be a mistake, but I do see us trying to think through more innovative ways to make sure our residents have the services that they need. I think we can play maybe a more, we already do. I know you played a role in that when you were formerly a house director. We already do things in that area, like the Rutland example, but can we do more, I guess is the question.
Now let me bounce this idea off you, whether we create this somehow internally with Dismas, or another organization is founded to do this service. Okay, well, I grew up in Connecticut, and they have things called mobile crisis teams where they'll respond to mental health episodes, substance use. So when I'm working in the house, or I was working in the house, and I have somebody who is in active relapse or having a mental health issue, I have nobody to call in the middle of the night. Who do I call?
Yeah.
The police if it's bad enough. And that's not where I want to go.
Yeah.
Where can we find an intervention, or what is an appropriate intervention at, the off hours? Not because, service providers work 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on how we could better address
That's a great question. I mean, that's a societal question. It's certainly a Dismas question, but it's even, as you say, it's even a bigger, it's a sort of, it's at the heart of, some pretty massive societal issues right now. Like you said, I mean, it's so poignant what you just said, like the only place to turn is the police, but that's may not be the right thing for the police. It may not be the right thing for the individual. It's not the right thing for anybody, So can we create, as a society, can we create some form of support? Like you said, mobile support or crisis support. I think that's a wonderful idea. I don't know that it's core to the Dismas mission, but Dismas would be a big consumer of that for sure, or could be a big consumer of that.
Right, because by and large, the relapse issues I've had with residents over the years happen during the evening and nighttime.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And that makes sense because resources aren't available at that time.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we wrap, resources around the problem? If your curve, the data's so great, right? Because if what you said is true, and I assume it is, so the incident of relapse is happening more out of hours, then as a society, how do we create structures and systems to support individuals, in those time frames? Is exactly because otherwise you're going to end up in, the cost of all this, of course, is just astronomical. Not that I mean that actually is that would be a minor investment, because the net result of not doing that is people then make mistakes and they end up back in jail, and we end up, incarcerating people again and spending, the money that we spend every year housing people in jails. And it's just this vicious cycle. And then they come out, without, a sense of community or connection that we all talked about. And we're just creating this kind of vicious cycle. So things like,
it's not limited to Dismas.
No.
I mean, we see someone in active relapse or a mental health crisis, and envision the response not being calling the police. Yeah. Envision it, a nurse or EMT shows up with a therapist or recovery coach.
Yeah.
And how could that change everything?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's definitely not. That's why I said it's a societal issue. There's if we could create that capability as a society, based on the data, the data says that more people relapse in the off hours when those support services are not available. I mean, if that is a true set of data, then as a society, we should be able to figure out how to wrap support around individuals at the time when they most need it.
And then the other end of that is, so we had somebody who relapsed, and we're working with them. They want to seek help, and that's okay. That's part of it. That's great. But if we have to wait weeks to get into residential treatment or whatever the service may be, what's the risk to the remainder of the residents if somebody's continuing to use?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic to manage.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, yeah, I have so much respect for, you know, our house directors and our assistant house directors and just the team on the ground, you know, that is dealing with the challenges in the house, you know, on a daily basis. And like, I think you said it, you know, half an hour ago in this conversation, everybody's different. And that's true whether you're, you know, the CEO of a company or you're managing a house, you know, like the situation that, you know, what Drew needs in order to be successful is different than what Jeff needs in order to be successful. And really good, you know, leaders have the ability to kind of understand that. But, you know, when you've got a house of 10 or 12, you know, men who have just come out of, you know, incarceration, the complexity of managing, you know, some with obviously addiction issues and mental health challenges and all of the challenges that they come with and trauma, childhood trauma, the complexity of managing those diverse set of experiences is you know, is mind-boggling. But, you know, I think that's kind of the rewarding part. I've heard you say this and other house directors I've talked to and assistant house directors. When you do have a success, when someone does, you know, head out and we do have a lot of success and heads back out and lives independently successfully again. I mean, you can look back at that as an individual and say, you know, that's a major accomplishment to help, you know, to have managed and navigated a situation like that. And for community members and volunteers, I mean, you know, coming into the house, I mean, we're not asking you to be a social worker. We're asking you to, you know, tell stories to people, listen, you know, talk about making maple syrup, you know, cook a meal and share a meal, talk about what it was like when you were a kid. You know, we're not asking you to, you know, we're just asking you to kind of wrap love and community around these people. And boy, people are so, you know, the people that I know who volunteer and cook and stuff, they're so good at that. Oh my goodness.
Is there a singular moment over your time with Dismas that kind of just you look at and say, that's why I do this?
What a great question. Boy, I can't remember the individual's name right now, but we're having dinner and he had a job at Dan & Witt's. And so he was working in the night shift, like the 7 to 10 or something like that. And so dinner was over at 6:30, we, you know, cleaned up, blah, blah, blah. We drove him to Dan & Witt's and he was talking about his life and his story and everything like that. And, you know, he's taking care of his, like, when he was 7, he was taking care of his 1-year-old brother and all this kind of stuff. We get up to Dan & Witt's and he goes, the buses are closed. You know, I have to walk home. And I was like, oh my God, you know, like that's like 5 miles at 10 o'clock at night. And he's working for 3 hours and he's going to walk back to Dismas' house. So I was like, oh my goodness. So, you know, I went home. We had a friend over visiting us that night, or a son of a friend of mine. And you know, it got to be like 9:15. I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going to go up to Dan & Witt's and offer that guy a ride home, you know? And I went up there and he had found a ride home from like one of his coworkers' moms was picking him up or something like that. So he said, no problem. But just the look in his eyes when I said that to him, that I had seen him, that I had, you know, just seen the challenge and that somebody was just going to do something for him. Like that to me, like I could just see it in his eyes. And I was like, okay, you know, that's why I do this. So,
yeah. I mean, sometimes that's all
simple.
It takes to push someone to the next level.
Yeah. Simple. Yeah. Just that somebody cared enough to have heard that story and just took a half step towards me. That actually I didn't even have to do anything with it other than just show up and look across the meat counter and say, hey, do you need a ride home?
And that's the key. Just showing up in itself is powerful.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And you just see in somebody's eyes, and you're like, okay, then just show up. You know? Just show up.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about too. And I spoke with him a couple of months ago and he's still doing great.
Oh, so that's good.
I mean, that's all we do. We just keep nudging and helping and showing up.
Yep.
The true work is done by the resident themselves.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
just provide the structure and resources.
Yeah, and just support and cheering them on. And little things like that make a big difference. You know, my wife was taking somebody to, you know, he had to go to the hospital for a procedure, and, you know, nobody was there to take him, and she drove him. But, you know, the kind of procedure where you had to wait there for like 2 hours until they came out, like you couldn't leave. They had to prove that somebody was taking him home. And, you know, she just sat there. I don't know, did the crossword puzzle. I don't know what she did. But those kind of steps, you know, like people then say, that person cared about me, you know, enough to do something like that. Just a little thing like that. And
imagine how powerful this becomes when it's an entire community of people doing this, taking that step.
It's just that little step. And it's not like this skill thing. You don't need to go to social services skills. It's just a little step. And if more of us took those little steps, you know, then our communities would actually be, you know, better, more connected, safer, all the things that we all want for our communities, you know. We're part of, you know, we can't outsource that to police, you know, we're all part of this. This is our community.
Yeah. And for those who would be resistant to the idea of having a formerly incarcerated person living next door to them at Dismas, the reality is the only difference is that, you know, they're formerly incarcerated because they live at Dismas. Yeah. If they didn't live there, they're likely to live somewhere else in the same towns right next door to you as well. Yeah. So isn't it better to give them the support in structure to help? Yeah, to help them reintegrate back into the community where they're really thriving, you know, connected community members. You know, like we all want to live with people like that. And yet, you know, it's not like a magic wand that we just say it can happen. I mean, you know, getting involved, you know, if you have the time and the interest in these kind of issues, you know, it's just super rewarding. Are you familiar with the Nashville Dismas House at all? The original model that we grew from? A little bit of in the Nashville, and Father, it was Hickey, right? Jack Hickey.
Jack Hickey, yeah.
They now have an apartment building. I would venture to guess 800 units. I don't know. It's enormous that they use, and they've grown in that direction. And I think that speaks to how grand the need is, the volume of people that need support. And do you think that's true also for Vermont? We could feasibly sustain 15 houses. Yeah, I think we have an obligation to do more, and, you know, as an organization, and I agree. I mean, I think, you know, I really believe personally in this community model, this community reconciliation model. And so I think it's, at least my own view is that if and when we build new houses or we support, you know, the transition of our residents to independent living, that we should always do that with a mind towards how do we continue to wrap community services and community support around those individuals and community connection. So even I was talking to some residents in Hartford 2 times ago when I was cooking dinner, and I was talking to them about this idea of supporting, because all of them are looking for housing, you know, and it's like they're too expensive, you know, they can't, you know, or there's barriers that are put up so that they can't lease and stuff like that. So I was asking them if Dismas got into that, you know, master lease or, you know, created an ability to do that, would they use it? And to one, they said yes. And then I said, would you also come back for like dinner every once in a while, and these community dinners, you know, if we created an opportunity where you could, you know, continue to share in community? And they said, absolutely, you know, like not like, you know, every night or anything like that, because they're on their own individual, you know, journeys. But, you know, 201, they said, I would definitely do that, because it gives them a connection back to the community members. It's ongoing. That's not like, okay, see you later. You know, it's like you have an opportunity. You're always part of this family. You're like an alumni. You can always come back. There's always join us for dinner. So before this podcast, we were talking about how this podcast got started, and how it happened was a group of Dartmouth students were doing a project with CATV, now known as Junction Arts and Media, and they were helping to connect the CATV resources in video and audio and media to community entities that needed help getting voice. And then those students, came to me in Hartford and said, hey, you should try this out. And I went to a presentation at CATV about podcasts, which previously I'd never even listened to a podcast. And I said, I could do this. This is going to be incredible. I have an outlet to give voice and have residents and even community members just tell their version of the story in their own words. You're a Dartmouth alum, correct?
Yeah.
Do you think there's more opportunity working with the college that's 10 minutes down the road from the Hartford House that we could explore?
Oh, totally. I think when we have students, you had students in last year, Jeff, who were supporting residents, like just coming into the house and sitting down with residents and helping them, figure out how to get a license again, or, just the basic things that they needed.
Yeah, and those two are now council members.
Yeah, they're now
Molly and Marissa.
Yeah, they're. I just think for sure there's more you can do that Dartmouth could do, or connections that we can make with Dartmouth. But to your point, I think things like this podcast. To me, I'm a storyteller. I think stories are, people love a good story. They're just an important way that we connect with each other and we understand each other. So things like this, and having particularly the residents, having their stories be told, and an opportunity for them to tell their stories in the community, I think is hugely important. Because the more we're exposed to their stories, the more we're connected to those stories. We all love a good story. So I love initiatives like this, outreach initiatives like this, because I think it builds community.
Yeah. And a different Dartmouth class, I met with them and I kind of talked about our need for what we spoke at a mobile crisis unit. Mm-hmm. What do our residents do when it's in the middle of the night and they need help? Mm-hmm. They want to seek help. And they created, they call it a resident hub. It's a resource manual that's now up on our website, dismasofvt.org, mm-hmm. that residents can go to and seek help without having to ask for it, where they can find providers, they can find even help with housing and jobs and anything they may need. And I think there's room for growth in that too.
Yeah,
imagine if we got technical enough to create a phone app, Dismas phone app, where I'm in crisis right now. I press this button, I can get connected.
Yeah, great idea.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the student population at Dartmouth that knows a lot of things that I don't.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of energy and initiatives.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also great for them, right? Because they're understanding that they're part, of a broader, diverse community. Their ability to navigate and to understand and to be supportive in that broader community is going to serve them well, no matter what they decide to do with the rest of their lives. Whether they go on to be a consultant or be in finance or be an author or, be a social worker or be an artist or be a, novelist or whatever, they're building a broader set of experiences and connections to a broader community is great growth for them too.
Yeah. And this is something I've really started to focus some efforts on. I've even gone as far as I make presentations at high schools and I get great ideas coming out of high school. I have another student from a Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. She's going to work with me creating some social media context for Dismas. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough not to know how to do TikTok. Yeah. But, it could be fun to try to get our message out in a fun way, a different way.
Totally. This is about connection. This is about community, about building community with a population that people don't often think about building community with. But we've got a track record of saying when you build community with that population, it really assists in their successful transition back into the world, into their own community. So, let's go find innovative ways to do that, additional ways to do that. Absolutely.
And I wish we could connect more with the Vermont Law School too. I think there's opportunity there. They have, I believe, the very first restorative justice program with Bobby Sand, which is
amazing.
An incredible program. I took one class with that, and there's a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the speaker series work that you and others have done in our community too, because I think that's another way to outreach, to bring, I was thinking about that because Bobby was, I think, one of the initial speakers in the speaker series, and it was just terrific. And I think those kind of things are just amazing.
As I'm starting to wrap up my thoughts with this podcast, one of the things I've taken away from my experience with you and Barty, your wife, is she keeps saying make deposits into the bank of goodwill. that sticks with me. Just, have good intentions, do good things, make honest efforts, and it'll pay off for you and all those around you.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're all doing at Dismas.
Yeah,
really.
Totally. And I would just say, to anyone who's listening to this, it's so, please, if you have any interest, please get involved. Like, come join with a meal. Like, come join an existing cook team and just sit down and see what it's like to share a meal. Cook, go ahead and go for it. It's an amazing kind of experience. There's so many ways you can get involved and just sort of see what it feels like. Obviously financial support is great and all that other kind of stuff. And we certainly benefit, our community is very generous. It's an important part of what we do, is raising money from the community and foundations and things like that. But it's also, like you said, the bank of goodwill, just doing stuff, and you'll get as much. The one thing I can promise you is I think you'll get as much out of that as you'll be able to give.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Going the Dismas. Learn more about Dismas of Vermont at dismasofvt.org.
Thank you for listening to this Jam podcast. If you have found this program interesting and would like to find more Upper Valley content or learn how to produce your own media, please visit us at uvjam.org.